Iowa.
Iowa is the leading producer of ethanol. About 43,000 jobs connected with that production. Ethanol is produced from corn. Iowa is the #1 producer of corn in the United States. The House of Representatives has passed a bill for 15% moisture or 15% mixture of ethanol with petroleum gasoline. That's E15. Up till now, E10, 10% mixture, has been considered a pretty good success story. So expanding it will have more homegrown, renewable energy if we can get E15 nationwide year-round. And it takes legislation to make that happen. In recent weeks, some of my colleagues have come to the floor to speak on this very same subject. Some for E15 legislation and some against E15 legislation. So I think there's a lot of myths about ethanol and E15 that need to be cleared up. One of those myths that continues to spread is that year-round nationwide E15 is that it is a mandate. So I want to be very clear. E15 legislation is not a mandate. It's a choice, and it's this simple. You're driving into the filling station to fill up your car. Even today, with the high price that it is, you will see that you have a choice of gasoline with no ethanol or with 10% ethanol or E15. Trouble is, not every retailer has it, but it is a choice when you go to the pump to punch the button you want for the type of gasoline that you want to put in your car. I support E15 legislation because it removes both outdated and unnecessary red tape from the EPA. Just as an example of that red tape is, the law says that in some parts of our country, you can't dispense ethanol in your gasoline June, July, August, and September. You can't do it during those months. However, we've been successful under 2 years of Trump 1, 4 years of Biden, and 2 years now of Trump by presidential waiver that we can have E15 nationwide. But that's the red tape that we shouldn't have to go through, and that's the reason for the legislation. It would allow consumers to have a choice to purchase E15 year-round in all 50 states, and it takes legislation to do that because you'll never get the retailers of gasoline to spend the money to update their pumps for E15 without the legislation. Some have done it now, trusting that there'll be a presidential waiver year after year, but you can't. A lot of retailers won't depend on that. So, this legislation is not a mandate because it would not force gas stations to sell E15 if they don't want to. However, because E15 saves consumers 10 to 30 cents per gallon, I suspect that many fuel retailers will choose to provide their customers with this high-quality, low-cost, homegrown fuel. I yield the floor, suggest the absence of a quorum.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Objection.
Mr. President, enforcing our nation's laws is not optional. Securing our borders isn't optional. And supporting the men and women who do this important work, funding law enforcement isn't optional either. That should go without saying. But unfortunately, Mr. President, members of the Democrat Party have made it very clear that they disagree. Incredibly, Democrats have refused to provide a single penny for border security and immigration law enforcement for fiscal year 2026. That's $0 for a physical presence at our nation's border. $0 to deport criminals who have made their way into our country illegally. If Democrats had their way, illegal immigrants would be allowed to flood across our nation's southern border entirely unchecked. And I guess we really shouldn't be surprised, Mr. President. After all, this is hardly the first time Democrats have demonstrated that border security and immigration enforcement are at the very bottom of their priority list. For decades now, Democrat-led cities and states have implemented sanctuary policies that prevent local law enforcement from cooperating with federal immigration authorities. These policies have had deadly consequences, yet Democrats have defended them and continued to uphold them across the country. Then there was the crisis at the southern border. Four straight years of record-breaking illegal immigration at our southern border under Democrats and President Biden. As the New York Times reported, and I quote, "After Mr. Biden became president, migrant encounters at the southern border quickly doubled, then kept rising. New arrivals overwhelmed border stations, then border towns, and eventually major cities like New York and Denver," end quote. That from the New York Times, Mr. President. Now contrast that with today. Illegal crossings have plummeted to a trickle. And as of the end of April, not a single illegal immigrant has been released at the border and into our country for an entire year. But, Mr. President, Democrats are apparently determined to bring back unchecked illegal immigration. And to do that, they are embracing the far-left ideologies of defund law enforcement and abolish ICE. These were once considered fringe positions among Democrats. Today, they're basically the official position of the Democrat Party. The junior senator from California said in January, and I quote, "I'm not giving ICE or Border Patrol another dime," end quote. The junior senator from Massachusetts told a crowd in February, and I quote, "We know that we must defund and abolish ICE," end quote. And one Democrat Senate candidate has even said, and I quote, "Dismantling ICE is the moderate position," end quote. Mr. President, this is today's Democrat Party, a party enthralled to its far-left base, and a party that has completely abandoned its national security responsibilities when it comes to enforcing immigration law and securing our borders. Mr. President, needless to say, as long as Republicans are in charge, we are not going to let Democrats defund border security and immigration law enforcement. So we're moving forward with a bill to fund these important responsibilities for the remainder of the Trump administration so that Democrats cannot again put our nation's security and American safety in jeopardy. Mr. President, I don't know who Democrats think benefits from blocking funding for Border Patrol and ICE. The American people certainly don't benefit from there being no law enforcement at the border. They don't benefit from human traffickers and drug smugglers being able to enter our country unchecked, or from rapists, murderers, and other criminals being allowed to live freely in our country. The Democrats' position puts illegal immigrants in danger as well. Border Patrol agents are the ones pulling illegal immigrants out of the Rio Grande and rescuing dehydrated migrants in the desert. But Democrats don't support these agents' work. If Democrats' position helps anyone, it helps the cartels, the coyotes, and other criminals who prefer to act without risk of detection and apprehension. And I suspect that's why we haven't heard much from Democrats in recent weeks about the core of this legislation. Democrats haven't exactly demonstrated an eagerness to come to the floor and defend open borders. And I strongly suspect that's because at some level they know that their position is completely indefensible. Mr. President, President Trump and Republicans have cleaned up Democrats' mess at the border. We've secured the southern border and put criminals on notice that they will no longer be living freely in our country. And we plan to keep it that way. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Sosa Brooks.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the press reports that Trump says he will table his $2 billion MAGA slush fund, but a promise from Trump is worthless. If Trump and Republicans are truly abandoning this corrupt scheme, they should have zero problem banning it in law. This week, Senate Democrats will push legislation to ban this slush fund and ensure no president can ever do this again. Trump's word is nowhere near enough. Donald Trump's attempt to establish this trust fund alone is one of the most glaring cases of corruption in American history. Trump's slush fund is the textbook definition of self-dealing. Trump sued himself, settled with himself, and then Trump gives himself and his family immunity to evade their taxes, and Trump makes you, the American taxpayer, pay for it all. This slush fund could never have passed the smell test. At a time when Americans can barely afford to fill their tanks, to keep the lights on, put food on the table, Trump wants the American people to pay for handouts for MAGA billionaires, cop-beating January 6 insurrectionists, and his own family. He wanted no transparency, no oversight, no accountability. It's disgusting. Now, Trump is claiming that the slush fund is dead for now, but Democrats will not stop until it's well and truly buried and can never see the light of day. Democrats are going to make sure this slush fund is dead and cannot be revived, just like we did with the ballroom. Republicans can try to wriggle their way out of answering for this corruption, but it won't work. If Republicans try to force through their reconciliation bill again, the first amendment I will offer will be to ban the slush fund permanently and forever. If Republicans try to meddle with the appropriations process to do Trump's bidding, we will fight it there too. And if Republicans try to use toothless constraints to make the slush fund more palatable, we will press them to dismantle it entirely. For something as inherently corrupt as this slush fund, half measures won't cut it. You don't fix a corrupt slush fund by relying on the word of the most untrustworthy president we have ever had. You ban it. The slush fund is rotten to the core. Democrats will make sure Republicans vote on it no matter what. This is corruption in broad daylight, and Republicans are foolish to think they can hide in the shadows. Now on costs. Last week, we got new inflation numbers showing that prices are at their highest level in years. Families are saving less as they struggle to make ends meet. Americans are working harder, paying more, and getting less. That's Trump's economy at work. From Trump's mouth to the American people's ears, he said, quote, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation. All Trump thinks about is building his golden ballroom, putting his name on a massive arch, lining his pocket with taxpayer dollars, and slapping his face onto a $250 bill. None of that lowers costs. None of that helps working families. All Trump's vanity projects do is waste time and money. And our Republican friends seem to go along with almost all of it, maybe even all of it. Meanwhile, two-thirds of Americans, say they've had to cut back on groceries the past few months because of skyrocketing costs. This comes as new data shows household electricity prices have spiked by 18% since Trump took office. With the hottest months now upon us, summer season, rising energy costs will only further strain families' pocketbooks. The average home cooling costs could reach nearly $800 this summer, an 8.5% increase over last year and 37% more than in 2020. A poll over the weekend found that 53% of all Americans say the current cost of living is the worst they have ever seen. What happened to lowering costs on day one? which Trump so proudly proclaimed. And of course, where are the Senate Republicans? Instead of listening to the American people, working with Democrats to bring costs down, Republicans are working around the clock to aid and abet Trump's corruption, to build his vanity projects on the taxpayer's dime, and funnel tens of billions of dollars to his masked agents, who are already flush with cash. Americans are screaming for relief, and all they hear back from Senate Republicans is silence. Complete, complicit silence. And on the Iran war, once again, the ongoing fighting in Iran has blown holes in Trump's claim that victory's at hand. Over the weekend, Trump said, quote, he's in no hurry to end the war in Iran. No hurry? Tell that to our troops who are in harm's way every second this war continues, including those who were fired upon in Kuwait just this morning. Tell that to their families. Really? No hurry? I'll tell you who's in a hurry for this blunder to end. The American people who are getting crushed by record gas prices at the pump. They're in a hurry. Trump has proven over and over again that he's incapable of getting our country out of this mess. Congress needs to step up. Democrats and a handful of Republicans came together before Memorial Day to advance a war powers resolution to withdraw our troops from hostility with Iran. We will not stop forcing votes to end this war until this disastrous war is over once and for all. Trump and his allies in the Senate may not see the urgency of ending this war, but Democrats and the American people do. Yield the floor and yield the floor.
Democrat Whip.
Mr. President, the Senate will soon vote on the nomination of Kathleen Lane, President Trump's nominee to serve as a lifetime appointment and judge on the U.S. District Court for the District of Montana. There are more than 3,000 licensed attorneys in the state of Montana. You would believe that the White House, in finding a federal judge for a lifetime appointment, would be able to find among those 3,000 plus licensed attorneys in Montana one with experience having served as a judge. Instead, President Trump has selected Ms. Lane. Ms. Lane is not remotely qualified to serve as a district court judge in the federal system. That's not my opinion. That's the official finding by the American Bar Association. Ms. Lane is the first judicial nominee to receive a, quote, not qualified, close quote, rating from the ABA during President Trump's second term. As the American Bar Association explained in finding this rating, quote, it's based on issues with her experience, which is an important component of competence. The organization found that Ms. Lane had failed to gain, quote, substantial courtroom and trial experience in the less than 9 years since she was admitted to the bar, end of quote. As the ABA detailed, quote, Ms. Lane never tried a case as lead counsel, whether civil or criminal. Moreover, as the ABA noted, it appears she's never conducted a direct examination in a courtroom, picked a jury, or offered an opening statement or a closing argument. Putting this lady on the bench for a lifetime appointment to the federal court would be like selecting an umpire for tonight's Major League Baseball game, who's never even worked a Little League game. Ms. Lane's experience is disqualifying. Now, my Republican colleagues may claim that the ABA, American Bar Association, is a partisan organization, but over the past year, the ABA has rated dozens of Trump nominees qualified or well qualified. Ms. Lane is the only one who has received a not qualified rating. Not only has her legal career been extremely brief, but it has also been extremely partisan. Ms. Lane currently works at the Republican National Committee, which President Trump highlighted when he announced her nomination. She certainly may not have courtroom experience, but she's got experience at the so-called MAGA think tank. The president claimed Ms. Lane, quote, played a critical role in stopping voter fraud at the Republican National Committee. He believes that qualifies her for a lifetime appointment to the federal court. But even before she went to work for the Republican National Committee, Ms. Lane repeatedly chose to litigate politically charged issues and work to limit women's rights, voting rights, and the rights of LGBTQ Americans. Ms. Lane is not the person for this job. She's too ideological, too inexperienced for the role to which she's been nominated. I urge my colleagues to oppose her nomination. Mr. President, on a separate topic, today is June 1st, the arbitrary deadline President Trump imposed on congressional Republicans to send their partisan funding bill to his desk for signature. So why aren't the Republican colleagues headed to the White House today for a flashy bill signing ceremony to fund more abuses by the ICE agency? I'll tell you, because 2 weeks ago, Senate Republicans left town after an internal revolt over the president's so-called anti-weaponization fund. Nearly $1.8 billion. 1.8 billion, that's even more than the ballroom. $1.8 billion for a slush fund for the president's cronies and allies. Well, who would be eligible for any part of the $1.8 billion fund? People like Brandon Fellows. This may be a new name to you, but we're becoming more familiar with him. He was pardoned by President Trump, a full and unconditional presidential pardon, for being one of the January 6th insurrectionists who was convicted and sentenced on felony and misdemeanor charges for climbing an exterior wall of the Capitol, entering the building through a broken window. Well, time has passed. Has he shown any remorse since he was convicted of that crime? No. He still believes President Trump's big lie about the 2020 election and the conspiracy theory that January 6th, which he's on video participating in, was a setup, entrapment. I remember that day very well. I was seated here. President Pence was presiding over the Senate. We were officially counting the ballots as to who actually won the election in 2020. All of a sudden, a little after 2 o'clock, those doors opened and policemen came in. I assumed they were policemen, they were in plain clothes, and went up to the vice president on the podium, whispered in his ear, and pulled him off the podium quickly through that door. We sat here wondering what was going on. There was a big demonstration going on outside. Nobody knew what was happening. They were making noise, but that's not unusual in the Capitol. At that point, a member of the Capitol Police, one of the officers who protected you in the gallery and me today when we entered the building, came and stood before us and said, "Stay where you are, stay in your seats. This is going to be a safe room. This mob that came up from the White House is going to be stopped. Stay where you are." So we all sat here, not quite sure what to do next. 10 minutes later, the same policeman came up and said, "New orders, leave immediately. Evacuate through this door and we'll follow you." So we headed out, all the senators off the floor and the staff as well, to an adjoining building. What happened next? The mob that broke down the doors and came into the Capitol, came into the Senate chamber and the House chamber, rifled through our desk, aped for pictures in front of one another, and basically threatened people who were here that they had to leave. That's what actually happened. Now, we know that happened because it was on videotape. We saw it. America saw it. Every minute of it. Followed carefully. And yet we actually have people today who deny it ever happened. If you're a student of history, you know that in the Soviet Empire they did that regularly. If history became inconvenient, they rewrote it, wrote another book, condemned people for saying the old way was the right way. That's what's happening here. Well, this fellow, Brandon Fellows, was one of the people who broke into the Capitol through a broken window. He still believes that Trump won the 2020 election. He still believes that conspiracy theory about January 6th, despite it actually never happened, is what he says, which he's on video participating in. He likes to spend his free time dressing up as an ICE agent and encouraging others to do the same to terrorize immigrants. How much is Mr. Fellows seeking from the anti-weaponization $2 billion slush fund of the president? He thinks his inconvenience he was encountered is worth 30 million federal tax dollars. 30 million. And we can expect droves of other January 6th insurrectionists to also seek these cash rewards. Even those who've continued to threaten our communities by committing more crimes, many of them of January 6th that mobbed this chamber, are back in jail for committing another crime after President Trump's pardon, ranging from conspiracy to murder to child sex abuse and exploitation. Let me say it a different way. While American families are struggling to afford gas for their cars, put food on their tables, pay their utility bills, thanks to Trump's tariffs and war of choice in Iran, the president wants to hand lofty payouts to his political buddies and the criminals who attacked our democracy at his request. It reeks of corruption. I'll also note as part of this settlement, the IRS is permanently barred from auditing past tax returns of President Trump, his family, and related companies. Get that? Ever play Monopoly? Remember that get-out-of-jail card you hung on to? President Trump wanted a get-out-of-jail card from the federal government, his government, that he would never be prosecuted for tax fraud. Never. It included his family, his colleagues, his business buddies, and friends. That was part of this deal of creating this slush fund. Is this America? Is this a monopoly game? And if it is, it's embarrassing. Permanently barred from auditing past tax returns of Donald Trump, his family, and related companies. Taken all together, this is deeply disturbing. Senate Democrats will continue to fight this unprecedented and unacceptable $1.8 billion slush fund for January 6 insurrectionists and Trump loyalists, and will work to halt the flow of taxpayers' dollars to Trump's massive deportation campaign, while standing ready to have a serious bipartisan negotiation about the need for reforms to our immigration system. If this partisan reconciliation bill ever sees the light of day, we'll put Republicans on record by votes on this floor as to whether or not they accept this as a legitimate exercise of government function. Will our Republican colleagues stand by the Constitution and the laws of our country, or will they join the president in this folly? I hope time will tell that they will join us in a bipartisan effort to stop the slush fund. I yield the floor.